All right, so welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
This time we're going to be diving into the world of English conversation.
Cool.
We'll be taking apart a podcast called Learn English in 3 Hours. All you need to master English conversation.
Okay, yeah.
You guys listening out there, you are no stranger to language learning, but
Right.
even for, experienced explorers like you,
Mm-hmm.
there's always those hidden treasures to uncover.
Absolutely.
And that's really what we're going for here. This deep dive is going to be a bit different.
Right.
Instead of focusing on just the basics,
Yeah.
we're going for those subtle nuances, those cultural insights, the stuff that really takes your conversational game to that next level.
I think that's what people really want,
Yeah.
That's not just about, hello, how are you?
Right.
It's about, getting those subtle nuances that really help you connect.
Exactly. Now, the Source podcast jumps right into the importance of practice, confidence, and context.
Mm-hmm.
And, those are really like the foundational pillars of any language, really.
The building blocks, yeah.
But what I found super interesting is how they emphasize this idea of register,
Right.
which is kind of like having different sets of clothes in your language wardrobe for different occasions.
Precisely. Exactly. Think about it. You wouldn't wear, a ball gown to a backyard barbecue.
Yeah.
And similarly, in English, there's this whole spectrum of formality
Right.
that we use.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you use like slang with your boss, they might think that's a little bit odd.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're overly formal with your friends, you're going to sound really stiff,
Yeah.
And so recognizing these subtle shifts in register is really key to sounding natural and avoiding those awkward moments,
Right.
which we all dread.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it makes total sense. It's like, knowing the right dance steps for different musical genres.
Exactly. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, you don't want to be waltzing to, hip hop music.
Exactly. And, just like learning a new dance, mastering these different registers just takes practice and observation.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So the Source podcast uses the example of greetings.
Mhm.
Hi, how are you? Versus the more formal, good morning.
Right.
I'm curious, how much do those subtle differences in greetings actually matter in your experience?
I think they matter a lot, actually.
Yeah.
They might seem like small details,
Right?
hi versus good morning,
Yeah.
but they can actually have a really significant impact on first impressions.
Okay.
So a casual hey, for example, might be perfect for a relaxed setting,
Yeah.
but if you say hey to your boss in a professional context,
Right.
it could come across as a bit too informal,
Yeah.
and it could actually potentially undermine your credibility
Wow.
before you've even spoken a full sentence,
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean.
So it's all about setting the tone.
So it's not just about being grammatically correct.
Right.
It's about understanding those social dynamics at play
Right?
and tailoring your language accordingly.
Precisely. And I think that's where things get really interesting,
Yeah.
The Source podcast. It goes into some common scenarios, like ordering food or asking for directions.
Mhm.
But I think we need to go a little bit deeper, than just memorizing phrases.
I agree. Yeah. What's that secret sauce that takes us from simply uttering the words to actually connecting in those situations?
Well, I think it's all about what I like to call the politeness factor,
It's a politeness factor. Okay.
which plays a surprisingly significant role
Okay.
in English conversations.
I see.
So even when disagreeing,
Yeah.
English speakers, we tend to use more indirect language
Yeah.
to soften the blow.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So instead of saying, you're wrong,
Right.
which is a little bit too direct,
Right.
we might say something like, I see your point, but beat,
Okay.
So it's more diplomatic, more tactful.
That's interesting. So it's almost like you're learning the art of conversational judo,
Yeah.
Using gentle force to navigate those potentially, sensitive topics.
Exactly. It's about understanding, the cultural preference for subtlety,
Right.
for diplomacy.
Yeah.
And even something as simple as asking for directions, that can become a cultural minefield.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine you're in a new city, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to find your way.
Yeah.
If you just blurt out, "Where's the train station?"
Right.
That might sound a bit abrupt, a little too direct.
Yeah, I've definitely made that mistake before.
Right?
So how do we avoid those conversational pitfalls then?
Just adding a simple, "Excuse me, could you please tell me?"
Okay.
Makes all the difference in the world.
I see.
It shows respect, right? It acknowledges the other person's time,
Mm-hmm.
and it just increases your chances of actually getting a helpful response.
Right. So it's really those subtle cues that transform you from like a language student to, a culturally savvy communicator.
Absolutely.
Which is really, what we're all aiming for, right?
That's the goal.
It's not just about vocabulary and grammar.
Yeah.
It's about mastering that art of navigating social interactions.
Absolutely. And I think, that's where things get really exciting.
Yeah.
We move beyond those really basic scenarios.
Right.
And we get into that more challenging.
Yeah.
And I think rewarding
Mm-hmm.
territory of like expressing your opinions.
Right.
Navigating disagreements.
Yeah.
Having those, more complex conversations.
I mean, that's a topic I'm sure so many listeners can relate to.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Even in our native languages,
Yeah.
these conversations can be tricky sometimes,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, what insights does the Source podcast offer for, handling these situations in English specifically?
Well, they offer a few, basic phrases,
Yeah.
I think.
Right.
I believe.
Mhm.
Those sorts of things,
Oh.
which are fine. They're good starting points.
Right.
But what I find fascinating is how we can take those phrases
Mm-hmm.
and use them as a springboard to express ourselves in more nuanced ways.
Oh, okay. I see. So it's like you have that basic set of tools.
Right.
And then you learn how to use them to create more intricate designs.
Precisely. It's about going beyond just stating your opinion
Yeah.
and understanding how to frame it
Mm-hmm.
in a way that is both assertive
Right.
but also respectful.
Yeah. Okay.
So, for example,
Yeah.
instead of just saying like, "I disagree,"
Mm-hmm.
you could say something like, "I understand your perspective, but I tend to see it a bit differently."
Oh, okay.
So it's acknowledging their viewpoint,
Right.
but still allowing you to express your own.
Mm-hmm.
It's a subtle shift,
Yeah.
but it can make a world of difference
Okay.
in how your message is received.
I see what you mean. It's
Yeah.
like adding a layer of, diplomatic finesse to the conversation.
You got it. And there are other techniques, we can explore, like hedging language, for example.
Okay.
I might be wrong, but
Right.
which softens your stance, right?
Yeah.
And it invites further discussion.
So it's almost like leaving that door open for collaboration rather than shutting it down with like a definitive statement.
You got it. And what's so cool about these techniques is that they're not limited to English.
Yeah. Right.
These are universal principles of communication that can be applied in any language,
Yeah.
any cultural context.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
Really.
Yeah. I'm already starting to rethink how I approach conversations, even in my own language. It's
Yeah.
making me think a lot about that. I'm really eager to, delve deeper into these techniques. What other kind of gems did you uncover in the source material?
Well, they don't quite, touch upon this, but I find that understanding like the cultural context of humor is also really essential
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
for mastering English conversation.
Because humor can be so culturally specific.
Absolutely. It really is.
What are some key things, we should be aware of in that regard?
So English humor, it often relies on irony, sarcasm,
Yeah.
self-deprecation,
Right.
which can be really tricky
Yeah.
to graft
Oh, sure.
for non-native speakers.
Right.
Because it's not just about understanding like the words themselves.
Right.
It's about recognizing the tone, the intent behind them,
Yeah.
and, misinterpreting a sarcastic remark
Oh, yeah.
can lead to some awkward moments, to say the least.
Absolutely. So it's like you have to develop a sort of cultural radar for humor.
Exactly. And it really comes with exposure and practice. you
Yeah.
know. The more you immerse yourself in authentic English content, the more you'll start to pick up on these nuances. Like watching British comedies, for example,
Right.
can be a great way to kind of get a feel for those subtleties of dry wit and sarcasm.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always found British humor to be particularly challenging,
Yeah.
but also incredibly rewarding
Absolutely.
once you start to get it.
It's like you're unlocking a secret code.
Wow.
Right. And once you crack that code, it just opens up this whole new world
Yeah.
of humor and connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's really rewarding.
This is fascinating. It's like we're, peeling back the layers of English conversation.
Yeah.
Revealing those, those cultural and social intricacies
Absolutely.
that lie beneath the surface.
And that's what makes language come alive, really.
Yeah.
We're not just learning words and grammar.
Right.
We're exploring, like, the heart and soul of English communication.
I'm so glad we're diving into this together.
Me too.
This is already proving to be incredibly insightful.
I agree. And I think we're just getting started, There's so much more to explore.
Oh, I can't wait. All right, so for our listeners out there who are ready to put these insights into action, what's one, concrete step they can take today to elevate those English conversation skills?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I would say, focus on one specific aspect that we've discussed today.
Okay.
Maybe politeness.
Right.
And just pay attention to how native English speakers phrase requests, how they express disagreements,
Yeah.
how they navigate those potentially sensitive topics.
Okay.
And just listen for those subtle cues of indirect language
Right.
and try to incorporate them into your own conversations.
That's a fantastic challenge.
Yeah.
And remember, fluency isn't just about speaking perfectly.
Right.
It's about connecting effectively.
Absolutely.
And sometimes, that most impactful communication happens in the spaces between the words.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go.
Cool. All
Yeah.
right. Okay. So we've talked about the importance of politeness and, all those cultural nuances.
Right.
But the Source podcast, they also emphasize the value of practice.
Yeah.
Even if you're not feeling 100% confident.
For sure. Yeah.
It's kind of like that saying, you can't become a master chef just by reading cookbooks.
Yeah,
You got to get in there and actually,
Get your hands dirty.
get your hands dirty. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about getting out of your comfort zone and actually using the language
Yeah.
in real life situations. Right?
Exactly.
And so, they encourage listeners to find language partners or participate in conversation groups,
Okay.
which is a great way to kind of put your skills to the test in, a supportive environment.
Yeah, it's like having that sparring partner to help you refine your moves.
Yeah,
In a safe space, right?
exactly. Exactly. And what I find so fascinating is that, even making mistakes can be incredibly beneficial.
Oh, interesting.
So every time you stumble over a word or a phrase, your brain is actually creating new neural pathways.
Okay.
It's strengthening your grasp of the language.
So it's kind of like those weightlifting reps at the gym. The more you push yourself,
Yeah.
the stronger you become.
Those gains.
You get those gains, yeah.
Yeah.
But I know, a lot of learners, they get kind of stuck in that fear of making mistakes.
Yeah.
Especially in front of others.
Of course. Yeah.
It can be a little daunting.
It's natural. It's
Yeah.
totally natural.
Of course.
Yeah.
So how do we kind of shift our mindset then from fearing mistakes to, actually embracing them?
Well, I think one way is to, record yourself speaking English
Okay.
and then listen back.
Okay.
I know it could be a little bit cringy at first.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Hearing your own voice, but it's actually a really powerful way
Right.
to identify, patterns in your errors and to see, where you need to work on pronunciation, grammar,
Okay.
things like that.
That's a great idea. I've never thought about it that way before.
Right.
Like having your own personal language coach
Exactly.
in your pocket.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask for feedback from others.
Okay.
So language partners, teachers, friends who are fluent in English,
Right.
they can all provide really valuable insights and encouragement.
Yeah, it's like having a team of supporters cheering you on along that language learning journey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to celebrate your successes too, right?
Right.
So every time you have a successful conversation or you master a new grammar point, acknowledge your progress, right?
Okay.
Give yourself a pat on the back. You deserve it.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Now, speaking of successful conversations, the Source podcast, it doesn't really delve too deeply into the art of active listening,
Right.
which I think is actually a really crucial element. It's not just about speaking flawlessly.
Yeah.
It's about truly engaging with the other person, showing that you're present in that conversation.
I couldn't agree more. Active listening is so important,
Right.
It's like that secret ingredient that elevates a conversation from just, this basic exchange of words to like a genuine connection, And it's about, like you said, being fully present, paying attention, not just to the words, but also to the nonverbal cues.
Okay.
Asking clarifying questions, showing that you're invested in what the other person has to say.
Yeah, it's kind of like being like a good dance partner.
Yeah.
You need to be in sync with the other person, right?
Exactly.
Responding to their moves, contributing your own steps to the flow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's so cool is that active listening, it goes beyond language.
Right.
It's a universal skill that can strengthen relationships. Deepen understanding in any cultural context.
That's a really powerful point. It's something we can all work on regardless of our language proficiency. Now, the Source podcast, it touches on this idea of utilizing technology for language learning.
Right. Yeah.
They suggest apps and online courses as helpful tools.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on, incorporating technology into the learning process?
I think technology can be an incredible asset.
Okay.
Offering those personalized lessons.
Yeah.
Those interactive exercises.
Wow.
A wealth of resources at your fingertips.
Okay.
It's like having like a 24/7 language tutor available whenever you need it.
Yeah, it's really amazing how accessible language learning has become thanks to technology, right?
Absolutely. It's incredible.
But I think, it's important to strike that balance between online learning and real-world practice.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you wouldn't expect to become a concert pianist just by playing, like, a digital keyboard.
No.
Right.
You got to get on that real piano.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So think of technology as, like, your training ground.
Right. And
those real-life conversations as, your performance stage.
Exactly. You need both to truly excel.
Yeah. Totally. Now, the Source podcast, they focus primarily on verbal communication.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's also important to acknowledge the power of nonverbal communication.
Right.
Especially when it comes to English conversation. I mean, body language can sometimes speak louder than words.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Body language is so important.
Right.
It's like this silent orchestra playing alongside our words.
Yeah.
It can amplify our message.
Right.
It can contradict it.
Oh, wow.
It can even reveal emotions that we're not consciously expressing.
That's fascinating, how much we communicate without even saying a word.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And just like spoken language, body language has its own set of cultural rule interpretation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what's considered polite or respectful in one culture might be perceived as rude or aggressive in another.
So, I mean, how do we navigate that nonverbal landscape then? It seems like it could be a minefield.
Yeah.
For non-native English speakers.
It definitely can be.
Yeah.
But I think the key is observation.
Okay.
Awareness.
Yeah.
Pay attention to how native English speakers use gestures, facial expressions, eye contact in different situations.
Okay.
And, try to mimic their behaviors while also being mindful of your own cultural background.
Right. So it's like learning like a new dance form.
Yeah.
Right. You observe those steps, you practice the movements,
right,
and you gradually develop your own style and flow.
Exactly. I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And, just like with dancing, practice makes perfect.
Right.
The more you expose yourself to those real-life interactions, the more attuned you'll become to those subtle nuances
right.
of nonverbal communication.
Okay. Now, the Source podcast, they don't really get into the world of idioms and slang.
Right.
Which I think can be a bit of a stumbling block for language learners.
Yeah.
These expressions, they're so deeply ingrained in the culture that they can feel like a secret code sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Idioms and slang are they're like the spice rack of the English language, right?
Yeah.
They add flavor, color, personality to our conversations, but they can also be incredibly confusing.
Right.
For those who are, new to the language. Right.
Especially for those, who maybe haven't had that much exposure to native speakers and how they speak.
Exactly.
So how do we crack this linguistic code then?
Well, immersion is key.
Immersion. Okay.
So the more you expose yourself to, authentic English content, movies, TV shows, music, podcasts.
Right.
The more you'll start to pick up on these expressions and their meanings.
So it's almost like learning the language through osmosis.
Yeah.
You absorb those nuances and rhythms by just being immersed in the environment.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask for clarification.
Right.
If you hear an idiom or a slang term that you don't understand, ask a native speaker to explain it.
Okay.
Most people are happy to share their knowledge and appreciate your curiosity.
Yeah. It's like having a personal tour guide to that world of English idioms and slang.
Absolutely. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
But I want to circle back to the idea of confidence.
Okay.
Which, the Source podcast, they emphasize this repeatedly.
Right.
Keep speaking even if you make mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think that's so crucial, especially for those who are just starting their English learning journey.
Yeah. It can be, confidence can be kind of a chicken and egg situation, right?
It really can.
You need confidence to speak, but speaking helps you build confidence. So how do we break out of that cycle, especially when we're, still feeling a bit shaky in our language skills?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it starts with recognizing that fluency isn't about perfection.
Right.
It's about being able to communicate effectively, even if you make a few grammatical errors.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you stumble over a few words.
Okay. So it's about shifting our focus from flawless execution to meaningful connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one way to kind of boost your confidence is to focus on your strengths.
Right.
So what aspects of English do you feel comfortable with?
Okay.
Maybe you have a strong vocabulary or a good grasp of grammar.
Right.
Build on those strengths.
Okay. So start with those strengths and kind of work out from there.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that approach. Yeah. It's about celebrating those successes and building from there.
You got it. And remember, every conversation is an opportunity for growth.
Right.
Right? So don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Challenge yourself. Embrace the learning process.
Right.
And the more you speak,
the
more confident you'll become.
Yeah. That's a really valuable reminder. It's so easy to get caught up in our own insecurities.
For sure. Yeah.
And forget that, language learning is a journey. It's not a destination.
Absolutely. It's a process of continuous growth and discovery.
Right.
So embrace those stumbles, celebrate those triumphs.
Yeah.
And just remember that every step forward is a victory worth celebrating.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
So the Source podcast, it kind of briefly mentions this idea of motivation.
Right.
But I think it deserves a little bit more attention, right? I mean, it's like the engine that keeps us going, even when the road gets tough.
Right. Without a strong sense of purpose. It's so easy to just lose steam along the way.
Right.
And what's so fascinating about motivation is that it can really come from so many different sources,
All right.
So it could be like a desire to connect with family members who speak English.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a dream of, traveling the world.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just a love of, exploring new cultures.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, it's that personal spark that keeps you going.
Yeah, so it's about finding that personal spark, that inner drive that keeps you, engaged and excited about the learning process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And once you've identified your why, it becomes so much easier to set realistic goals.
Right.
Create a roadmap for achieving them.
So it's like having a compass and a map, right? To guide you through that, sometimes uncharted territory.
For sure. And just like with any journey, there will be bumps along the way. There'll be days when you feel frustrated, discouraged,
Sure, yeah.
Maybe even tempted to give up.
Yeah, so how do we kind of stay motivated then?
Yeah.
When those inevitable challenges arise?
I think, surrounding yourself with a supportive community can make all the difference.
Yeah.
So find those language partners.
Yeah.
Join online forums. Connect with other learners.
Yeah.
Who share your passion for English.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sharing those experiences, both the triumphs and the struggles.
Right.
Can provide a sense of camaraderie.
Yeah.
Keep you motivated.
It's like having, a team of fellow adventurers by your side, encouraging you to keep going, to keep exploring.
For sure.
To keep discovering those new horizons.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of celebration, right? So every time you hit a milestone, no matter how small, acknowledge it. It's a testament to your hard work and dedication.
So it's like you're planting these little flags along your language learning trail.
I love that.
Yeah.
Marking your progress.
Yeah.
Reminding yourself of how far you've come.
Absolutely. Now, the Source podcast, they focus a lot on the technical aspects of language learning, right?
Right.
But I think we need to also acknowledge that transformative power of cultural immersion.
Yeah.
Like stepping into a different world,
Yeah.
You experience the language not just as a set of rules, but as this living, breathing expression of a culture.
So it's like you're moving beyond the tourist brochures.
Right, exactly.
And actually living and breathing that local culture.
Precisely. So immersing yourself in English-speaking cultures through, movies, music, literature, maybe even travel.
Right.
That's when you gain this deeper understanding of the nuances, the humor.
The social customs, the values that really shape communication.
Yeah, it's like you're adding those vibrant colors and textures to your language tapestry.
Well, I love that.
It creates this richer and more meaningful experience.
It does. And I think, that's the ultimate goal of language learning, right?
Right.
It's to connect with others on a human level.
Yeah.
To bridge cultural divides, to expand our understanding of the world.
Beautifully said. It's about seeing language not just as, this tool for communication, but as a gateway to this world of shared experiences, diverse perspectives, and just endless possibilities, really.
Absolutely. And, the journey itself is just as rewarding as the destination, The process of learning English, with all of its challenges and triumphs, it can be so enriching and transformative.
I couldn't agree more. This deep dive has been a fantastic reminder that language learning is so much more than just memorizing those vocabulary words and grammar rules.
Absolutely.
It's about, exploring those new cultures, connecting with others, expanding our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is, this journey, it never really truly ends.
Never ends. There's always more to learn, always more to discover.
Right.
Always more ways to grow.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listener with a final thought to ponder.
Okay. All right. So think about a time that you struggled to communicate in your native language. What could you have done differently?
Right.
Perhaps you could have, chosen your words more carefully, paid closer attention to your tone of voice.
Right.
Or simply just listened more attentively.
Okay, yeah.
And, these same principles.
Yeah.
They apply to English conversation as well.
Yeah, that's such a valuable insight. It reminds us that, effective communication is a universal skill.
Absolutely.
And those lessons that we learn in one language, we can apply them to any other.
Absolutely. And remember, fluency isn't about perfection. It's about progress, persistence, and the joy of connecting with others through the power of language.
Beautifully said. Well, to our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep practicing, and never stop embracing that adventure of learning English. Who knows what amazing discoveries await you on your language journey?
Until next time, happy chatting.